Yep, I think we are live now. So
Yeah.
hello and welcome everybody. We have a special episode for you today. I have got a special guest as well. Adam, my guest today is Adem Abebe. He has a PhD in comparative law, and he's also a commentator on peace building, on constitution building, on democracy, elections and governance, and on different Ethiopian affairs. And he was one of the experts involved in the constitutional interpretation that Ethiopia underwent when it decided to postpone elections. So we have an expert who has a wealth of experience on Ethiopian matters. But beyond that, one of the other reasons that I want to invite my guest today is he's someone that I would describe as sympathetic to the position of the federal government as far as the war is concerned. Maybe not agree with the positions, but at least I presume that he understands why the federal government was forced into the war. So I hope we will have an interesting discussion today. But before we proceed into our discussion, let me give a chance for Adam to say a few words about himself. So Adam, welcome and thanks for joining me.
Thank you very much, Teklay. I'm glad. We were just saying earlier that our how can I put it? Very rough conversations on Twitter have brought us here. So I'm very happy to join you in the conversations. My name is Adam. Some of you may know me already. I'm a lawyer by training, but I think I'm a political scientist by inclination. I have been writing generally about comparative constitutional law issues in Ethiopia and beyond. But at the moment I am here, Teklay invited me, I think because of what I think has been an continuous engagement in terms of the developments in Ethiopia, in Tigray and beyond, before already. And it's a pleasure to join you. I'm happy to engage some of the issues. Just quickly, I think you're right that I'm sympathetic in the sense that I understand the logic, the thinking. But I was against the war when it started. Before it started as well. But what I have tried to maintain is an engagement, a conversation that is more less emotional, let's say, than most of us have been. But again, thank you very much for having me, and looking forward to the conversation.
It's my pleasure. It's my pleasure, and it was good that you mentioned Twitter, because I first met you on Twitter as well. And one of the reasons why I wanted us to have this conversation is because on the one hand, I could see that, I don't know how I would say this without sounding condescending, but I could see that you don't mean any harm to Tigray. You don't wish the things that have happened in Tigray to happen. And on the whole, I could see that you want good things to happen in Tigray and elsewhere in Ethiopia. But on the other hand, on some of your tweets, I sense that you say things that are extremely difficult to understand for me and for many people, I would dare say. And that got me wondering if it could be because we don't understand each other's position. Maybe there is something that we fundamentally misconstrue about one another. And I thought one medicine for that would be to sit down and have negotiations. And if things go to plan, we could reach at a more nuanced understanding of each other's position. So that is what I expect today to happen. And one technique that I thought would help us in achieving that is something that they call steal money. So what I will try to do is I will try to the best of my ability, I'll try to present what I think is your position. And when you feel that I have misconstrued your position, or when you think that I have mischaracterized your position, you will correct me, and we will fine tune your position until you are satisfied with my understanding of your position. And then you will do the same of my position. And that would give us a foundation upon which to discuss. We understand each other's position and we see where we can take from that. What do you think about that? It's an experiment. It could go horribly wrong, but it's something that we could try. And
absolutely.
my hope is that we could give a blueprint for other people as well to follow, because one of the things that I see in Ethiopian politics is people are entrenched in different camps, and they don't have any common foundation upon which to sit and to discuss. And maybe we could set an example in how we do that. So maybe I will let you have a few words about that experiment, and then we go to that.
I think it's a good idea. Just to say that I think I am happy to join you precisely because we disagree. We have exchanged some strong words on Twitter and beyond. And this is exactly what we should do. We should, there's a saying, keep your enemies closer. We are not enemies, but I think we have to keep people we disagree with closer. And ultimately, what leads to progress, what leads to a change in the way we do things is engagement, and we have to engage principally with those we disagree with. So I'm happy. Let's go for it. You're right. I think often the differences are based on misunderstanding of how we think the other person thinks, where their starting points are, what the premises are, and of course, especially when you are on Twitter, it's very difficult to explain yourself. So I'm happy that we can do it in a bit more detail, so that there is a sense of common understanding. At least there's a sense of common starting point, even if we don't address all the disagreements. So let's go for it.
All right, great. So bear with me as I try to summarize your points, and at the end you correct me, and we can iterate as much as is required. So this is what I think he believed. I will start from when Abiy came to power, from when he became prime minister. All right. So I believe that you believe as soon as Abiy came to power in 2018, he embarked on a journey of democratizing Ethiopia, of bringing about some fundamental change into Ethiopia, right? And you believe that the TPLF wasn't happy with some of the things that Abiy was trying to do. And the TPLF, rather, I should say, was intransigent in some of the discussions that they were trying to have between the TPLF and the Abiy Ahmed. And beyond that, you maybe suspect, not believe, but you at least suspect that the TPLF was funding and funneling money to some rebel groups throughout the country to instigate violence and to try to bring about some instability so that Abiy would be seen in bad light. Maybe you don't have concrete evidence for that, but you suspect that could be one of the things that the TPLF was kind of launching or cooking from Matale. At least that is what the federal government accuses the TPLF of having done before the war broke out. And things developed, the tensions heightened, and the election came, right, where you were involved in interpreting the constitution to allow the federal government to postpone elections, right? And the TPLF, of course, categorically rejected that, and they went ahead with elections. And you believe that the reason they went ahead with elections was not because they were interested in democracy, or not because they were protectors of democracy, but because they want to piece off the federal government, right?
Yeah, so maybe because there's a lot of things, so I don't know how slowly.
You will correct me later.
I just try to make sure that we don't miss some of the issues, because there's a lot of, so maybe if we have like maybe 3 or 4 points and then we build it that way.
Then I will give you a chance. I will give you a chance to correct me.
Okay.
I will give you a chance to correct me, and then I will carry on. So I leave the floor to you.
Okay. So when Abiy came, what happened was a reshuffle. That is what happened. It was just, there was a struggle for power that was principally happening within the ruling party, and segments within the ruling party rode on popular protests to lead to a reshuffle. So the reshuffle is the only thing that was accurate. And secondly, we didn't really know Abiy before he became prime minister. We really had no idea, or at least I didn't know about him. So when he came to power, there were 2 things he did. One was, and this is, I think, incontrovertible. It's not controversial, and that is that he wanted to change the narrative about Ethiopia's past. So if you know how the constitution is built, and how the TPLF essentially has been building, general ethno-nationalist groups have been building the narrative that Ethiopia was at worst a colonial state, or at best a graveyard of ethno-nationalist rights. So Abiy said, no, this is a country where everybody was a victim, but it was also a country that a lot of people contributed to. So in terms of his understanding of the Ethiopia's past, he represented a fundamental departure from the TPLF-dominated EPRDF. So I think that is one. And secondly, indeed, he also expressed a desire.
So Adem, if I might interject here, what do you think was the fundamental difference between what the TPLF-led government espoused in terms of philosophy or in terms of the understanding of Ethiopian history, and what Abiy came up with? What do you think was the main difference?
So basically, I think that the TPLF, and as you know, they are the ones that midwife the constitution. I think they were the leaders at that time. And if you look at the preamble, for instance, of the constitution, it talks about oppression. Essentially, there's an accusation that a group, it is understood to be Amhara, essentially, was dominant as an ethnic group, not just as an elite group, but as a dominant ethnic group, and to, as I said, to the worst extent, in a way, colonizing, or at least as an oppressive entity, right? So Ethiopia is essentially seen as a hodgepodge of ethnic groups that were forcibly brought together by the Amharas. That was the beginning, the starting point. And what Abiy tried to do was, no, Amharas were as much victims as everybody else. And Ethiopia has an oppressive history. It was an oppressive state, but it was not an ethnically oppressive state. I think there is that point. So he understands, obviously, that non-Amharic speaking communities had faced oppression. But I think, and this is my thinking, his understanding of Ethiopia's past is that it was just an elite group oppressing a country rather than an ethnic group oppressing another ethnic group. So I think to that extent there is a fundamental difference.
When you say the TPLF's understanding of Ethiopia was that the Amharas as an ethnic group were the dominant group, or they were oppressing other Ethiopians, I suspect that you are alluding to the so-called TPLF manifesto of the 1974, right?
No, it's not the TP. I mean, if you look at the preamble itself,
because I'm trying to get to the bottom of things here, because the TPLF are absolutely clear in saying that it was a class oppression, not an ethnic group oppressing other ethnic groups, but there was a ruling elite, a ruling class, and they say that the Amhara, the average Amhara, was as much oppressed as the average Tigrayan. So there was any delusion in that when it comes to who was oppressing and who was being oppressed.
I think so. Maybe you're looking a bit too far, too backwards. I think if you look at the student movement, it had two segments, two clusters. One was what we just explained. One was what saw Ethiopia's problem in class terms. There is an elite community. It doesn't matter who you are. You can be assimilated into that, into the culture, the identity, the thinking of the elite, and there is the rest, right? But there's also others, particularly following what is in Mwaleling, that describe Ethiopia not just in class terms, but in ethnic terms as well. And I think the TPLF was actually formed by individuals from the student movement that believed not just in class terms, but in primarily ethnic terms of the Ethiopian state. So you're right. There are points where they have said that it's a class issue, but if you look at the solutions they have proposed, the ethnic federal system that has come about, of course, class is always an issue, but they saw the problem primarily as an ethnic problem, and that's partly because they think ethnicity was a precursor of class.
Adem, I'm sorry, but I will have to ask you to define what you mean when you say ethnic terms, because whenever we make now allegations of what the TPLF believed we have to base it on the document. We have to make sure that we produce evidence for what we say, right? Because that's one of the things that we are trying to make a culture, and in this discussion, we want to be facts based.
I think there is
there
no
are two
better.
documents. There are
Yeah,
two documents that I could summon to my mind now. One is the so-called manifesto, and the other document that we could refer to now is the Constitution. And in both documents, the TPLF is absolutely clear that it was a class struggle, not an ethnic struggle.
I think I mean the manifesto. I know it referred to Amhara as a class sometimes, but the most concrete expression, which is the Constitution, speaks nothing about class. It doesn't say anything about class. If you've looked at it, it talks. Its starting point and its end is ethnicity. It's in the sense of linguistic groups. So the Constitution speaks nothing about. It says nothing about class. It's about ethnic relations, and I think it's the most concrete. As you know, there is a lot of doubt in terms of the manifesto, what exactly it said, what it didn't say, but the Constitution, there's no doubt about it. And if you read about it, the preamble itself talks about one group dominating the other.
Adem, I'm not taking exception to your claim that ethnicity is given maybe a bigger room than it should have been. I don't doubt that. What I'm saying is the Constitution doesn't paint the ethnic Amhara, for instance, as having been dominant in Ethiopia. That's not what the Constitution is based on. The Constitution says there are different groups in Ethiopia, ethno-linguistic groups, you could say, and the philosophical justification is that they should be in a position where they are able to self-determine, right? And the Constitution should make that a possibility. I think that is what the philosophical foundation of the Constitution is. But it doesn't, to my knowledge, again, you are a better expert on Constitution than I am. But I don't think it paints any ethnic group in any negative light or in any.
No, you're right. So the Constitution doesn't say the Amharas were the oppressors, but I think that is how it's understood. The preamble talks about one group, dominating others. It talks about that one, and secondly, I think you cannot understand the Constitution if you don't understand the history behind it. So there are ideas, there are philosophies that provide expression to the institutions, to the language in the Constitution. That's one. But secondly, you're right. I think we could have had the current Constitution without having that historical understanding, that historical narrative. We could have established an ethnic-based federation as we have now, founded on self-determination, but we did not have to create the impression that Ethiopia's problems were fundamentally linguistic, ethnic. So I think that's a starting point. And in fact, as I said, if there were two lines in the 1960s, it was the two. There were some groups that principally saw Ethiopia's problems as class, and that language was just part of that class expression, right? And there were others that saw language itself, the linguistic relationship itself, as the problem. And I think the TPLF was in the second category. But you're right that we could have had the current constitutional arrangement without that historical baggage. And I think if you understand the origins of the idea of nations and nationalities in the Soviet Union, it was less accusatory of the Russians, right, at the time, than, at least in terms of its narration, the way the Ethiopian constitution was built upon a narrative of, it doesn't say it, the Amharas and all, but it was that's understanding that it is founded on a narration of an Amhara dominating everyone else, and the whole purpose was essentially to recalibrate that relationship. So, but I agree with you. I think so. Our difference is not whether the constitution should have been ethnic, but the TPLF founded it on a narrative of one group dominating everyone else, and that obviously has consequences, especially to those who are now considered Amhara, or who have who now consider themselves as Amharas.
Well, again, I mean, I don't want us to risk being bogged down in legal minutiae of the constitution, but my understanding is that the constitution doesn't base itself on one ethnic group being dominant over others, and the constitution doesn't present itself as a cure against that. I think that what the constitution says is there were historical injustices against some ethnic groups. Some ethnic groups or some nationalities or some nations weren't in a position to be in charge of themselves, and that was saw as a fundamental problem that needed to be addressed, right? And the constitution put forward a solution to that. It gave all the ethnic groups in Ethiopia, I would rather call them nations, it put them at the driving seat, right? That is what happened with the constitution. It doesn't in any way say that one ethnic group was dominant and the other was oppressed, or the other was subjugated, or anything of that nature. Although that kind of argument could have been fairly made. I don't think that was the foundation. But again, for now, what matters is what you believe. It's not. I'm not really interested on what the constitution is based on. I'm interested in what you believe, and it looks like that you believe the constitution was laid on some faulty foundation, and Abiy came and he tried to redress that. Is that fair?
So exactly. So basically, there was a narration behind the constitution, and what Abiy did was change that narrative. He essentially made all ethnic groups owners of Ethiopia's past, or at least that's what he tried to do. Before, the Ethiopians, as I said, for some, it was even seen as a colonial state. So essentially, it was seen as a state of the colonialist within Ethiopia, right? And everybody else, Ethiopia did not belong to everyone else. And I think that change in narrative was critical. I think that was central to some of the disputes, some of the problems we subsequently faced.
So we're talking about a man who was an integral member of the OPDO, which itself was an integral member of the EPRDF, right? So this was a man who was at the center, at the heart of the party. And he, insofar as I could recall, he didn't say anything against the constitution. He accepted the constitution in principle, which you seem to have issues with, right? And I think so. That's what I'm trying to say. I do not think. I mean, obviously, he is open to changing the constitution, but what he has argued, at least as far as what we know, is he changed the narrative about the past, about the foundations of the constitution, but not. He has not expressed any hatred, or he has said that ethnic politics, not the constitution. Ethnic politics has run out of control, and we need to put a stop to it, right? But he has not said he wants to dismantle the constitution or anything of that sort. So what he changed was the narrative behind the constitution. So that's why he was fine, I imagine, with what was, with the structures under which he was operating, and that's one. And secondly, we should also not underestimate the oppressive, the suppressive institutional structures of the former state. So even if you are an insider, you had very little liberty to talk about some of these issues, even if you didn't believe in them. So one, just to summarize, he's not against the constitution. I don't think he has expressed that yet. He has challenged the narrative that is the base of the constitution, yes, but he has not, as far as I know. Even the manifesto of Prosperity Party does not say they want to change it. They said if it has to be changed, we have to follow the process. That's what it says. And I haven't heard it. He has talked about, as I said, an out-of-control ethnic politics. He has spoken about that. But I do not think, and I stand to be corrected, I do not think he has said the constitution needs to be washed away and replaced. He actually, in my opinion, is an ethno-nationalist. That's how I see him. Yeah, well, I think I get your point when you say that he tried to change the narrative, and I think that is right. I think on the political spectrum, on the left to right spectrum, Abiy would be way to the right to Meles Zenawi, right? And I think that position would reflect in how they would want to frame Ethiopia as a country. So Meles would be more sympathetic towards federalism in the proper sense of the term, and Abiy would be more sympathetic towards, maybe I wouldn't say unitary, but a more centralized structure, right? So it doesn't surprise me that he was trying to change the narrative, insofar as by narrative you mean in terms of ideological viewpoints. There would be a
so
difference.
So maybe if I can
But
contrast them, So if I can quickly contrast Meles and Abiy, for Meles, he was trying to change an empire into a state, right? For Abiy, it was a state.
What do you mean? What do you mean when you say he was trying to change an empire? I mean, I have an idea of what you could mean.
Yeah, so basically, he essentially, and this is my thinking, for Meles, it is a country that always was divided. It had a core Amhara center, but the rest was not really part of the country. So it was not a nation, it was an empire, right? A loosely organized, exploitative empire. And what he wanted to do is that through an ethnic-based federal arrangement, we can build the Ethiopian state, the Ethiopian, as a country. For Abiy, he sees the pre-1991 Ethiopia as a state on its own. It can make that legitimate claim, and that we have changed that narrative. So basically, it's a state that needs to democratize. It's a state that needs to gel together well, but it was a state nonetheless. For I think the EPRDF and former Prime Minister Meles Zenawi, it was an empire that he was trying to transform into a state. I don't know if I make sense, but that's how I see it.
It makes perfect sense, and I think let's park the train here with regard to the ideological viewpoint. That's fine. And I see your point, and we could have an interesting debate as to which narrative or which historical understanding of Ethiopia would be closer to reality. But at least I know where you stand with this regard, right? So you believe that Abiy came to power and he was trying to change the narrative, and that didn't sit well with the TPLF. Is that fair?
So that's right, one. And I think these are like some of the subsequent points that you made. So you're right. So I think there were a few things, and Abiy obviously had to take control, right? And not just becoming the prime minister was the first step, but the center of power was not in the position, at least not when he joined. So there were several centers of power, and as a prime minister, he had to take those over, right? And obviously, because of the speed with which it was moved, and particularly because with the speed with which the Prosperity Party was formed, there was a lot of, in my opinion, disconcert among the TPLF, because they saw his movement as too fast, and also of trying to undercut their control of key sectors in the state. So there was an element, as a prime minister, you have to take control. And that meant he had to take power, and unfortunately, he had to take power from people who had power, and at the time it was
which they had happily relinquished, right?
But that was political power, right? So there's political power, and there's control of the security architecture, and of course there's also control of key economic sectors as well. So
when you say that, I want to make sure that you are factoring the fact that the TPLF was one of the driving forces behind the change, right? When they had their congress, their meetings, I think it was in Hawassa. The TPLF was one of the parties that said that we should release all political prisoners, and the only way to address the protests and demonstrations that were rampant in Oromia was to change leadership, right? So the TPLF was in no way against the change, although I suspect they weren't particularly happy about Abiy. I think they had doubts about his capability, but in terms of the bigger picture, in terms of bringing about change, I don't think the TPLF was against that. So I want to make sure that
I do not think they were against it, but they were not the drivers. I think they were forced to make concessions. And could they have taken a different option? Could they have tried a more confrontational approach? Yes, they could have, and they didn't. And I think it's not easy for those in power to give power up easily. So I think to that extent they deserve credit, but they were not supportive of the process. That's one. And secondly, I think why they did not like Abiy, and according to our post facto, what we know that they actually supported Shufara Shugute from the south, from the I think it's a Sidama, and I think they were not worried just about Abiy's capabilities. I think they were worried about.
Okay, again, I will have to interject. I don't want to come off as rude, but I have to make sure that we are on the same page.
Right. Yeah.
The TPLF is on record saying that I think it was via Subhatnagar and then later Debretsion saying that they had at point blank directly told him that they don't believe he was good enough. So it was a point that they raised, and it was a genuine concern when if you listen to Subhatnagar explain his thought process when it came to Abiy. I think he used this reference of a gene out of the bottle. If you are a gene and if you are forced out of the bottle, there is no way to get you back in. So they were that convinced that he was incapable of leading a country. So I don't think it's any secret that. Yeah. So again,
right. I think
I want us. Yeah. So again, what I want us to do here is I want us to, rather than speculate, which is fine, you can do that in politics, but we could rely on the things that on public record, and they have made the position.
You are right. So you are right. So publicly, that was their main concern. They said they were not sure about his capabilities. That publicly, that's the thing. But there is one thing. So it's a democracy, and this is unfortunately that's a reality. In any democratic process, in any electoral process, it is about votes, right? And of course, whoever is in power, whoever has the power to choose, can make that judgment, right? But ultimately, you have to make concessions. You have to accept it. And he was accepted. And quite frankly, you're right. Nobody knew this guy, and maybe they knew him more because they had access to intelligence and all of that. So maybe they had a better, they were better judges of his character, his capabilities. But they had no right. They had no right, and it's very important to try and to undermine him, because he was ultimately voted through a process that the party established, and this is a process that the TPLF designed in its own interest. As you know, the TPLF was composed of 4 parties that had the same number of seats, and even within that process, this guy was elected, right? So they had no right to undermine somebody who came.
So when you say undermine,
yeah.
Adam, when you say undermine, I think that is one of the common accusations thrown against the TPLF, right? And I have seen people who believe that opposing Abiy and making sure that Abiy didn't succeed in the direction that he was trying to take Ethiopia wasn't within TPLF's remit as a political party, right? So it is to you, in your judgment, in your understanding of politics as a political party, if you are absolutely determined in opposition to a certain view, can you be said to be undermining, or is it your job as a political party to do that because you don't agree with the vision?
So it's very important.
Dude, I don't know if my question was clear.
No, it's clear. It's very clear. So it's very important to know that both authority and opposition are governed within rules, right? So they can undermine him. Politically, they have the right, but they cannot go out of the rules, out of the law to do that. And I think some of the things they did, including, for instance, rejecting federal arrest warrants, you cannot do that. Because this is, I mean, you can argue that it was not legitimate, that there's no legal ground and all, but you cannot deny, essentially, you cannot de-recognize an entity, a government, to do that. So you are right. So politically, you have the right. You have to oppose them.
Even when it's blatantly clear that it's selective justice bordering on, I would say, vengeance.
Well, so that is, I think, that's where the challenge is. You see, those are subjective. These are subjective judgments. You can make that judgment, especially when you think you are the victim. You think, okay, we are being targeted and targeted alone. It's understandable. And I think if you ask any person who has been accused of committing a crime, they don't always agree. There are people who are innocent, are arrested, and they are released, right? So we can make that judgment. You're right, but if we have to take the TPLF on their words when they say they didn't believe he was capable, we also have to take the government on its words and say, okay, they had a case. And I think what they said was, give the person up. We want to prosecute the person. They did, there was no guarantee that the person would be convicted. Of course, because of our past experiences, there's very little trust in the legal process. And quite frankly, that's, I think, one of the heritages of the TPLF-led government. So there's very little
so you're
trust
telling me,
in our institutions.
So let me give you a hypothetical case, Adam. So to many of us, it was clear that the arrest warrants had nothing to do with any supposed crimes that they had committed. It had everything to do with them being members of the TPLF, and there was a high demand for members of the TPLF to be jailed to appease the public. So it was absolutely clear. And you're telling me now that even when that was absolutely clear, even the federal government could have been after maybe all the entire TPLF leadership, they should have waited ideally and submitted themselves to the mercy of the federal government. That's your point, right?
So first one is that there is no clarity. That's what I'm trying to say. And considering what has happened other country in Ethiopia, quite frankly, I wouldn't say there is no case to answer. So what I'm trying to say, that your assumption that it was pure vengeance or pure jingoism, essentially populist move to give some of his followers some scraps, I don't think that was accurate. Considering our history, considering what was happening in the country, people like somebody who was at the helm of the intelligence services, if you know what has been happening in the country, I'm sure there are cases that they misanswer. And
so you're telling me, Abiy Ahmed, who was an integral member of the security apparatus of the country, who used to report to Getachew Asefa, and Getachew Asefa, the person who has been made to be the evil of the last 30 decades, and people who directly reported to him, like Lemma and like Abiy, you're telling me that they could come and they could come clean and they could be the most innocent people in the country, and they had the right and the justification to jail him.
So that's what I went. So there's two concepts, and I think that was what the problem was. So the one is there is justice. So if you and I steal something and they arrest you, you cannot say, "Why are you arresting me?" You should, if you don't arrest Adam, don't arrest me. So there's the sense of equality and there's the sense of justice. So what you're talking about is equality. So they say, indeed there were violations, and we should have, everyone else should have been prosecuted. And I think that's one of the problems. If we have to come to a discussion, I think one of the problems in the way that the reform, or whatever we want to call it, moved was it individualized the problems of the country. It was a systematic, organized problem, and it required a systematic and organized response rather than piecemeal, ad hoc, as you say, perhaps also to make some populist statements and all. So there was that lack of systematic manner of addressing what was essentially a systematic problem. I think that was one of the core weaknesses of the reform. But otherwise, I think it's very difficult because, today it's like, I don't know how many people steal in Ethiopia, in Addis Ababa or in Mereba Esset, I don't know, every day. But probably only 2% of the people are arrested. So you cannot say that until you have arrested 90% of the thieves, you're not going to touch me.
I don't think that's a fair. I don't think you are trying to draw.
I'm simplifying it. Obviously, I'm simplifying it.
So
but it's my point.
It's a clear-cut crime, stealing, and we're talking about something which was, for the most part, political rather than anything to do with jurisprudence, right? So there was a huge difference in terms of that. And I think at some point in the beginning, actually, the TPLF was more than ready to hand over the people that had arrest warrants against them, like, for instance, the Maytech General, Confederaño. he was happily handed over by the TPLF, because at that point they were under the impression that the federal government was trying to charge people who it genuinely believed were suspects, right? So the TPLF was under that impression, but at some point it became absolutely clear that the federal government was trying to decimate the TPLF leadership. It was very clear. And now your contention is that even when that was clear, the TPLF should have simply stood by and waited. That's your
My
argument.
intention is that it was not as clear as, I mean, I understand, because from the TPLF's perspective, I understand. They felt targeted. And I think that's what I'm trying to say. If we had addressed it in a more systematic, more comprehensive way, we did not even need to go into individual criminal accountability mechanisms. We could have addressed it in a more sustainable, in a way that actually pushed everybody up, rather than trying to hunt specific individuals as criminal as they may have been. So I think that is where the mistake is. And what I'm trying to say is that I think the TPLF thought they were being targeted. I'm sure, and TPLF sympathizers also felt the TPLF were targeted. And for a lot of people, the thinking was, and this is very important, that's where the lack of clarity. So for the TPLF, it was clear that they were trying to take, essentially to decimate the entire leadership. But for the rest of the country, they are saying, well, we have to target, we have to start from the top. And they were on top. That was the thinking. So in any case, I think just to clarify, for me, the mistake was to try and address it in an individualized manner, when the problem was more systematic, more comprehensive, and it required an equally systematic and equally comprehensive response. That did not happen. And of course, that created fear, suspicion, the things that we're talking about now. And when somebody is afraid, when somebody is suspicious, and I don't know, in one of my pieces, I said, suspicion, hatred, fear, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you think I don't trust you, you're going to do things that make me not trust you, right? It is a self-fulfilling prophecy, and that is what happened. And I think that is what ultimately led to the war. It's miscalculations. It is fear. It's suspicion from all sides, trying to second guess how the other person is thinking, rather than talking just like what you and I are doing. And I think that's what led to the problem. And I think at the moment as well, I don't know if we'll get to it, we have to see what is happening in a broad, systematic way. It is not an individual's problem. So you can get rid of Getachew Reda or Abiy Ahmed or Debretsion, but the problems will remain. So we have to try and see beyond these people, beyond the face of these parties. And I think that's exactly what we should have done earlier. I think that could have saved us a lot of the pain and the suffering, the agony that we're going through now.
So I think at some point you said that the federal government was trying to jail the people at the top of the leadership, and to me that wasn't the case. To me, it was absolutely clear that the federal government was after people who are from Tigray only, and of course to create some semblance of parity, they tried to jail some people from other ethnic groups or from other political parties as well. But there is no doubt that the juggernaut, the machine, was after people from the TPLF, and it was absolutely clear. Now we could debate that the TPLF should have simply acquiesced to that, and they should have accepted to that, or they should have done what they did. They should have woken up to what was being done, and they should have drawn a red line and said enough is enough, which is what they did. So we could debate about that, but for now, I will sidestep that, and at least as far as your belief is concerned, I understand what you're saying. You're saying that the TPLF proved to be an obstacle to the justice system, and that shouldn't have happened in a way. That's your belief.
So I think it all started because I said they were trying to undermine him, his government. That's where all this started, and I think there were reasons to think that they were trying to undermine him. But I think so. Where we have differences is in our thinking of why they were doing it, what they were thinking when they were doing it. So for you, it's because they felt that it was unjust to target only them. But for a lot of people, the thinking is, well, you have to start from the top, and they were on top. That was the thinking, right? And then that is when I think, quite frankly, it doesn't matter which person was targeted, even if they have targeted everybody from everywhere, because of the sense of ethnicized politics, because of the sense of suspicion, the feeling of being targeted would not have gone away. And I think that's what we should have understood then and try to address it in a broader, more forgiving, more forward-looking manner. So basically what I'm trying to tell you, that we made a mistake in trying to pursue, whether it was the TPLF or anybody else at the time. We should have pursued it, but in a different way, in a way that addressed the underlying fears and suspicions.
All right. So you believe that the TPLF precipitated the war by being an obstacle to the justice system, by being obstinate in a way. They should have accepted, and they should have been more receptive of what the federal government was trying to do. And the fact that they failed to do that was a contributing factor to what eventually happened in terms of the war.
Absolutely. So this war did not. It was not a one.
It doesn't mean, again.
It was several building steps, and that's one. I don't want.
Yeah, I don't want to give my listeners the impression that I am completely agreeing with you. I'm trying to present your point of view, and then you will do the same to mine, and then we will at least have established a common ground. I don't know if we will manage to do that today, but at least
I understand your thinking, and you understand my thinking. That's the whole purpose.
Absolutely, yeah. So as far as the war is concerned, you believe that it wasn't in Abiy's plan to go into war. He was dragged into war because of the part of the things you explained, and we could go into other things that the TPLF had allegedly done to curtail the things that he was trying to do. Is that what you believe, or tell me what? Yeah.
So what I believe is this. I think the war, I have used this in my private conversations. For me, it was like two kids playing games, and one will push, the other one will push slightly harder, and the other one push slightly harder, and that is what was happening. They were testing. They were testing each other. Quite frankly, and this I have said it from the beginning. I don't think the TPLF wanted war. I don't think Abiy wanted war. I think they knew that war was going to be very hard. Everybody knew it was going to be extremely difficult. And quite frankly, I don't think Africa has seen war as intense as we have seen in Ethiopia in the last decade or so. I don't think this is a very it's a huge war that we've gone through, and I think they knew. They were clever enough to know that war would be devastating on all of them. And quite frankly, that's what is happening now. Neither of the groups, including Eritrea and Amhara, whatever you want to call them, I don't think anybody is going to gain from that war, or at least they could have gained whatever they are going to gain from war without the war. So in that sense, I don't think there was a desire. But what they were playing was chicken game essentially. It was they were daring each other, and ultimately one was bound to miscalculate. And the one that miscalculated first, in my opinion, was the TPLF, because they thought they were going to get attacked. And we could say.
What do you mean? What do you mean when you say miscalculate? Can you explain what you mean?
So basically, they were, both sides, I think, were trying to pressure the other one into submission, right? They were trying to make the other one realize that they were serious, that if necessary they will engage in war to get their way, right? But that always means that you have to always second guess what the other one is thinking, right?
No, can you Adam, can you tell me how you think they could have avoided miscalculation in the face of what was happening then?
So Teklay, there's 2 points. So I understand what the TPLF thinking, at least at the time, the TPLF thinking and the Tagaro thinking at the moment.
No, I'm trying to get you. Yeah. I'm trying to get you to talk about the things that were happening around them, be it the shenanigan that Abiy was making with Abiy, the things that the Amhara militia was doing, and everything else that was happening around the TPLF. Given that, how do you think they could have avoided miscalculation. That is what I want you to talk about, so that I want to make sure that we understand about the developments that happened before the war.
So this is what I think. I think, for instance, if when the elections were postponed, and you spoke about it earlier, I think the TPLF could have accepted that ruling. I mean, I know they didn't agree with it. I didn't agree with it, particularly in relation to regional elections. My argument actually during the interpretation exercise was that the Constitution allows the postponement of national elections, but the Constitution does not deal with regional elections. And if the Constitution does not deal with regional elections, then that decision about regional elections has to be taken somewhere else, right? It has to be decided in a different process and not through constitutional interpretation. And that is actually that was one of my main criticisms of the judgment. But because the process, what the Constitution says.
So you agree, you partly agree with the TPLF's point that the government shouldn't have been in a position to adjudicate matters that directly affected it.
No,
right?
So yes, so my interpretation of the Constitution would be that regional elections, the fate of regional elections should have been decided by the House of People's Representatives rather than through the constitutional interpretation process, because their mandate, their term is defined in the electoral law, not in the Constitution, right? And how to extend it, when to extend it, for how long, all of that should be addressed in the law itself, right? So I'm not agreeing with what the TPLF did, because ultimately, whenever there's a question of constitutional interpretation, you have an authority, and then that authority says this is how it is. You have to agree, even if you don't agree with it. You have to accept that judgment. And I think there was absolutely no need for the TPLF to do that. That's one. And secondly, and this is also my thinking, because I think the facts are extremely deceptive. I don't think we know. The TPLF was second guessing the federal government. The Amhara was second guessing what the TPLF were trying to do. But overall, I think this is my thinking.
But before you proceed, Adem, yeah? I want to make sure that I am following your line of argument here. When you talk about the authority, who are you referring to?
The House of Federation. The ultimate. So you can interpret the Constitution in a way you understand it. I can do that, and everybody can do it. But ultimately, the authority, the one with the mandate to make a final judgment, is the House of Federation. So once the House of Federation said this is how it is, even if it's wrong, even if you think it's wrong, because it's very hard to say it's wrong because it's interpretation, right?
So you're telling me, again, this is legal matter, so there's a chance that I could be making a fool of myself. So you're telling me that the House of Federation has the remit or the authority to tell people in Adwa, for instance, that they can't elect their own leaders. Is that what you're telling me?
Under the Constitution, yes, they can do that.
Would you agree with that? If that was
absolutely
the case?
So you can't disagree with the decision, because that is exactly why there is need for interpretation, because you don't agree on what the Constitution is saying. And that is why constitutions provide for a final decision-making process, because it's always the case that you will not agree on certain things, and therefore you have to agree on a process. Okay, we are not going to agree on what this means, so what do? You follow the process. And once the House of Federation says that, you have to challenge it through a similar process. You can ask for a review and all, but you have to accept it. Right?
So again, Adem, I think this is going to sound more academic debate rather than more practical. But I want to ask you, if in principle the Tigray government or the Tigray people disagreed with the decision of the House of Federation, which, by the way, let's not forget, didn't involve any representative from Tigray, and the decision was made in very hesitant and very acrimonious manner because of the situation that was prevailing then. Given that environment, was the Tigray government within its right to disagree and reject the decision? And if, hypothetically, if a regional government rejected a federal decision, shouldn't there be a process of appeal and arbitration, which didn't involve the federal government? Should the federal government have had the final say without any chance for appeal?
Well, so unfortunately, you have to follow the process the Constitution establishes. And here I actually wrote my PhD criticizing the process of constitutional adjudication in Ethiopia. It was extremely politicized. It was, because it's a political entity, there will always be a political majority and a political minority, right? So if you give a political entity the ultimate say on what the Constitution says, you are essentially giving a body interested in the outcome the ultimate say. And that is what I have criticized. But unfortunately, that's what you have, right? And this was actually, and if we go back to the beginning, the way the power of constitutional adjudication is given to the House of Federation because it is seen as the home of ethnic groups, if you will. And it's that logic that starts with we, the nations, nationalities, are the authors. We are the ones who should interpret it. So it's a defective, it's a bad institutional arrangement. I have criticized it, but it is what we have. You see. So the Tigray government was, they were right to disagree with it, but they were wrong to reject it. You see, because ultimately, that is the process they designed. Right, and secondly, because that is how the Constitution says.
What do you mean when you say? What do you mean when you say they designed? Who are you referring
to? The Constitution, the TPLF, were they designed the constitutional architecture.
Well, again, I think we are descending into innuendo when you say they, because
the TPLF-led government adopted the constitution that we have now, right?
I think the TPLF would. Again, I'm not speaking here representing the TPLF, but I think the TPLF would take issue to your characterization that it was a TPLF-led process, because intellectuals from all over Ethiopia were involved, I think, and it was, insofar as you could say anything led, you should say EPRDF-led. I would.
Okay. Well, yeah. We can say, but what I'm trying to say that they were part of the government. Maybe I'll put it that way. That adopted the constitution. So they knew that this architecture. Obviously, when you are in government, it's great because you control the entity that takes the decision. But they should have realized that there could have been a possibility that you may not control it, and therefore you need an independent entity. But because the starting point was ethnic politics, they said the ultimate end should also be ethnic politics, and therefore the ultimate say should be given to the House of Federation. So basically, there were matters that are obviously extremely political, like constitutional interpretation.
So again, Adem, I think I want to emphasize that when you say the House of Federation, you are referring to the House of Federation that didn't involve any representative from Tigray at that point in time, and it was clear that the House of Federation was there to rubber stamp whatever you wanted, right? So you would agree with me?
No, but that's actually not accurate because one, and this is very important. One, yes, the TPLF, the Tigrayan members of the House of Federation boycotted it, but you cannot boycott a proceeding to make sure that you don't get a decision you don't like. It just doesn't work like that, because if that's
because they knew that it was fait accompli, right? That's why they boycotted it.
Yeah, but so what does fait accompli mean? We didn't know what the decision.
They knew what the decision. They knew what the decision was going to be, and insofar as the House of Federation was involved, it was only to give a semblance of procedural accuracy. That there was no way that the House of Federation was going to decide, no, we should have election now. They are postponing it would be against the Constitution, despite what the federal government wants them to do. So there was no chance of them saying anything that would contradict what the government was trying to do, right?
Well, quite frankly, one, we did not know. One, two, and again, this is very important. Even if that was the case, that was the procedure in the Constitution. So you cannot just outright dismiss it. You can disagree with it, but you have to accept it because that is a process in the Constitution. Because if we say we are not going to accept it because we think that it's gamed, right? Anybody can say that, right? And therefore basically the whole structure collapses, right? And quite frankly, and I don't want to be, I'm not a consequentialist, but it did not hurt them a penny. They could have accepted the decision, and in the end, the election as well, it returned TPLF. They could have said,
you know what he was trying to do, right? He was trying to do what he did in Somalia. He was trying to do what he did in the Amhara region. He was trying to install his own administration in Tigray, and that was a no-go area in Tigray. There was no way that anybody would have been happy with Abiy sending his own vicars to Tigray to administer. So they knew.
There was no plan. There was no plan. There was no such plan. That only happened once the war started. But there was absolutely no plan to do that, because
what do you think happened before the war happened? What happened in Amhara region, for instance? What kind of administration is now running Amhara region? An administration that, to be fair, is a messenger of Abiy, and it was delegated by Abiy. It wasn't really elected by the Amhara people. And the same is true in Oromia, and the same is true in Somalia. And that was being tried to be copied in Tigray as well. And that was a red line that Tigrayans, as a people, I would dare say, were not ready to cross. And I think at the heart of the problem is that.
I think we should, I think, I understand that sense that the Tigrayans didn't want it, but I think it's not accurate to judge other groups, other regions are so subdued and just helpless.
No way, no.
I think it's not accurate to do that. Yeah,
Adam, I'm in no way.
So I think the Amharas
and
the Somalis, I think they have the people they want.
If you give me a minute, I'm in no way saying that the Tigrayans are exceptionalists in this case, and I'm not saying that the Amhara people would have been happy with an administration being imposed from above, but because of some historical context. There is a difference, given that the Tigrayans, for instance, had fought for 17 years to make sure that kind of administration wasn't installed in Matale, right? So it carries more weight than in other areas, but that doesn't in any way say that the Tigrayans are exceptionally averse to that kind of administration.
Let me rephrase it. I think so. What I'm trying to say is that, of course, the federal government, because of the party structure, has some influence, right, in terms of who can be a leader and all. And of course, also because these leaders that we have, they were not elected recently, right? They are all they originate from the 2015 elections, right? So they are not elected in that sense. But we should not think that, and this is my judgment, that these were people that Abiy wanted. I don't think he was just like they were not like the foot soldiers that you could just simply change. I think there was more negotiation, more engagement, I think more influence. I think the party has had some influence in terms of who runs each of the states. And I think it's good for you to learn now that there was a real fear that Abiy was actually trying to get some kind of, I don't know, a different government. I wonder, was there like a split within the TPLF that created that fear? Because I think in Amhara, in Somali region, most of the people were actually people within the older party, right? So they are in the same structure, and I think there was some competition and all.
It's not really the identity. No, it's
but
not so much the identity.
Why would the TPLF be afraid if they are capable of
I'm
engaging
not
the
saying
national army?
Adam,
why were they concerned about a puppet government?
I think we're changing into the thing that we vowed not to do, in the shouting match. So
sorry.
No, it's my fault as much as yours. I think I'm not implying that there was a split within the TPLF, but it was clear to any politically conscious person in Tigray that there could be people within the TPLF who are sympathetic to Abiy would be sent as administrators to Tigray. And it wasn't the identity of the person so much as it was how they were made administrators. So there was that concern. It's like it wasn't a concern among the party brass. It was a societal concern, and there was an apprehension, right? The TPLF read into that public mood There would be a huge dissatisfaction and unhappiness if that was to happen. And the TPLF had to align with the views of the public rather than the other way around.
Can I say so? I think so. First, it's very important. It's very, very important to know Abiy has absolutely no mandate to replace a regional president or a regional government. Only the regional council can do that. So, for instance, if Abiy wants to change Agenyo, right? That's his name, the Amhara president. He cannot do it. He would have to convince the parliament. He would have to convince. What did he do? What did he do?
He changed and chopped governors in Baghdad.
So I think so. We don't know if it's. You see, that's so.
Come on.
But can I explain? I think it's very important to not underestimate the power of structures, the power of parties. We should not underestimate them. So what happened? So there were two. So first was what is his name? The former Amhara president. I forgot his name. He was killed, right? And there was somebody had to take over. So there was a decision. A choice has to be made. And of course, as a federal government, you want to have some influence in that. That's absolutely normal. The American.
So you believe that it was the party apparatus within the Amhara that was making those big decisions. That's your belief, right?
Exactly. But of course, the federal Abiy and the federal entities will try to leverage their support towards candidates that they prefer. That happens. That's absolutely normal. Because if Joe Biden wants, I'm
actually staggered. I'm actually staggered that you believe somebody who would be not favored by Abiy could be elected as governor of the Amhara region. I'm flabbergasted that you believe that could happen.
Absolutely, that can happen. Of course, he got because quite frankly, and this is I don't know how much you read about intra-ethnic politics within Amhara, within Oromos, and within Tigray and all. But actually, some of the thinking is that Agenyo is one of the less. I think Temasgen was actually seen as more pro-Abiy because of religion and all of that as well. He's seen as more pro-Abiy, and Agenyo are seen as more that they are not there, and then the Gaddu and Demak are seen as like the middlemen, right? So you have people like Temasgen who are more. They agree with, they believe in Abiy's mission and all, and you have Gaddu and Demak who are in the middle, and then you have Agenyo and others who are actually more assertive in a way. So what I'm trying to say is it's not that Abiy did not get what he wants, but it's not because he had absolute control. I'm sure there were other aspiring people as well. And when there are divisions, of course, as a federal entity, you try to influence that decision. That is absolutely normal. In fact, let alone within one country, the Americans try and influence who becomes president in Kenya and everywhere. It's normal.
Of course, that's politics. I'm not denying that. I'm not denying that.
And basically, what I'm trying to say is that you should not assume. I think you're right that the TPLF obviously has more clout, more history, more cohesion. I think they have a better cohesion than parties in other regions. But we should not dismiss the other structures as simply useless. And legally, at least, and this is what I'm trying to say, TPLF need not worry because legally, the regional council had the mandate to decide who becomes the region's government legally. So it doesn't matter what Abiy wanted, unless the Tigrayan Regional Council wanted to change the leadership, nothing could have happened. This is very important. So, and I think that's why a lot of people say the party is very centralizing now, the Prosperity Party, but ultimately the decision is made in the regional councils. And of course, as a party, you try to influence those institutions, but it doesn't mean you are guaranteed to get your way.
Again, I don't 100% know what the TPLF's position would be, or what the TPLF's particular apprehensions or aversions were with the move that Abiy was making. But my guess would be that they were trying to defend a more fundamental principle, which is that elections must not be postponed arbitrarily, right? That was the principle that they would defend, and they failed, and I would say correctly, that Abiy was gaming the system to buy himself time, and that is exactly what happened. He jailed the people that would have been credible opponents in any election in Addis Ababa. And the TPLF was spot on in predicting that that was what Abiy was cooking behind the scenes, right? And they didn't want to play along with that kind of game, right? They needed to stand their ground, and they needed to tell the nation that there is no way that we are going to be fooled by what is being done now. And they needed to set an example. I think that is what the TPLF done, and I actually feel that the intellectuals of the country should have sided with the TPLF in standing for a principle, because it was absolutely obvious that the Abiy was trying to postpone the election to buy time. There was no way that it was because of the COVID pandemic.
I do not agree.
So you believe that it was because of the pandemic that it was possible?
Can I say this? Because I actually know a little bit, and I'm not saying you don't know, but I actually know the background, because so the electoral board was in no shape. And this is very important, because I don't know if you know, but the Electoral Commission was restructured.
Can we start? Adem, can we start with the official reason that was given to us? The official reason that was given to us was the pandemic meant that election was impossible. That was the reason.
Exactly. That's what I'm coming.
It wasn't logistics. It wasn't logistics that was given as the official explanation.
So, can I say so? Because the Electoral Board was organized late, they needed every single day. They needed every single day to be able to deliver elections in time. They needed every single day. So when COVID arrived, there were deliberations. There were discussions within the electoral board, and it was the board that said, if this thing continues for more than 2 weeks, because they were already tight on time, they had to do everything, even in the best of circumstances, they had to do everything right to get the elections done in time. And then COVID came, and unfortunately, because we had to do a lot of our stuff actually comes from abroad. Even the box, the electoral board, the printing, everything is actually printed and imported from abroad, unfortunately. And once the supply lines, what is called the supply routes were disrupted, and once the board, because of the trouble, it meant that it cannot recruit its workers and all. There was no question that the board could not have held the elections in time. So what happened after was, what do we do now? So there was no question that because of the pandemic, the electoral board could not hold the elections. So the next question was, okay, if elections cannot be held, what do we do? What happens? And that is where all the debate came. But it was not, and I understand, obviously, especially because we don't trust our institutions and our country, but I know a bit more because I have actually been following the electoral board. I was involved in the drafting of the legislation that set it up and all. I know that even in the best of circumstances,
why didn't they upfront say that they couldn't hold the election because of logistical reasons? They didn't say that.
Yeah, they said that because of COVID, we cannot organize the election. That's what they say. It disrupts the logistics. It disrupts
so you're telling
everything.
You're telling me that the pandemic, COVID, was a problem insofar as it prevented them from distributing logistics. Was it that?
Everything, yes. Yeah. So
I want us to be clear, because the official explanation given to us, and I'm sure I could pull it out. It's a statement somewhere, is that it would be risking the lives of people if the elections went ahead because of the pandemic, and they needed to wait until health authorities said that elections could be had. Right? That was the official explanation.
So that was the decision.
Are you telling me that was the decision? Are you telling me that you believe they were forced against their wish to postpone the election because they were worried that the pandemic could spread?
So yes, basically what it meant was that if you have to take precautions to prevent infections and all, it means everything will be delayed. Whatever takes 1 day, takes 2, takes 3 days, right? And already before the pandemic, the board had to do everything right to get the elections in time. So when COVID arrived, if you have to make adjustments to make sure that it doesn't infect people and all, and to also get your things, including from abroad, everything would have been delayed. So that's why they said we cannot deliver the elections in time. And everything else was, okay, what do we do now? What does the Constitution say? If elections cannot be held, and that was a fact, the board said we cannot hold it. And now the question was then, what do we do? If elections cannot be held in time, what does the Constitution say?
Adam, the idea to postpone the election wasn't something that happened after the pandemic. There were already talks of postponing the election even before, right? So it wasn't a new idea that came in the aftermath of the pandemic.
Yeah, right? Exactly. So basically, there was a lot of fear already that the board may not manage, even in the best of circumstances. So when COVID came, it was just too much. They could not have, they would have struggled. That's what I'm trying to say. They would have struggled in the best of circumstances to deliver the election in time. And once COVID came, it made everything impossible, because if you have to make adjustments to make sure that it doesn't, essentially you don't harm, you don't risk more infections, everything would be delayed more, right? So they said, okay, we cannot deliver it. So everything else was essentially, okay, if in fact elections cannot be held in time, what do we do? What does the Constitution say and all? So it was not Abiy. And I obviously I cannot be sure, right? I'll never know, but I can say this, it was not Abiy that wanted. He was lucky, yes. What you said. So just because somebody's benefiting from something, it doesn't mean they did it. I think we should not always read backwards. You're right, it gave him time. You're right, it gave Prosperity Party time to organize. And then, of course, what happened subsequently, including the detention of Jawar and Eskinder Nega and all of that, all of that created even strengthened the suspicion, right? In that sense, but I can assure you, as much as I know, and I swear to God, it was because it had nothing to do with Abiy or Prosperity Party. It was logistically impossible. It was logistically impossible to deliver the elections under COVID circumstances. And everything else was, okay, if we cannot hold the elections, what do we do?
I think I would need to take in a bit of liquor to believe that you actually believe what you're saying.
You're telling me we can have. I can get some wine if you want. We can.
I think I will wash it down with some alcohol later, because it's extremely difficult what you're saying. So you're telling me that people were absolutely free to do whatever they want. They could even demonstrate in their thousands in Addis Ababa. There was no restriction whatsoever. But you believe that the COVID was kind of hamstrung the election board from distributing logistics and other. So there is a leap of faith in there. There is a leap of faith that one needs to take.
I agree. I think we need that. But I can tell you, so you cannot judge the board based on how you judge the government. Of course, the government, they were having campaigns, but it's an independent entity. It is a responsible entity. And just because the government is, creating whatever fake things to have campaigns and all, it doesn't mean the board should do that, right?
So out of sheer curiosity, Adam, you don't believe, as many people do, that the election board is one of the luckies of Abiy Ahmed? You don't believe that?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not.
You haven't seen any signs that they were doing?
Absolutely not. I mean, obviously I cannot be sure, but for me, in my opinion, from my judgment, from what I have seen, absolutely not. And I think it's very important to know that just because somebody's benefiting from something, of course, that creates, in law, in criminal law, one of the things it's about motive, right? And if somebody benefits from something, you can say maybe they have the motive, right? But it doesn't mean that everybody with a motive did it, right? And he benefited from it, absolutely. He benefited, and that's why I think it was Merera Green. I said it was a hand of God. He said, and it's true. And the COVID may have saved Abiy. Maybe he would have lost the election, or I don't know. In Oromia, in particular, certainly in Tigray, of course. But he may have won the elections in the country, but he could have lost the elections in Oromia. And of course, because of our ethnicized politics, it would have been very hard for him to remain prime minister if you don't win your constituency. So did he benefit from it? Yes, I think there was a massive risk and didn't happen because of COVID. But just because he benefited from it, it doesn't mean he did it. Basically, the point I'm trying to make is that not everybody with a motive is a criminal. We have to remember that.
I think I'm really trying to contain myself not to say that you're being a little bit naive, but I think you understand my
I have
struggle.
heard it before. Again, don't worry, Teklay, I've heard it before. Yes.
All right, but Adam, I think this hasn't gone the way I had planned it, because I was, like I said before, I was trying to, at least today, I thought we will have managed to understand each other's position, and then I was thinking we'll take it from there. But obviously, inevitably, we easily got bogged down in debates. Yeah. But I think we can
continue if you want for another half hour.
I think we're doing a worthwhile exercise nonetheless. I'm enjoying this, and we're learning.
But I think you should get some water. You must be thirsty, you know?
Yeah, I think we will have part 2 and part 3 of this discussion, rather than having one long discussion today. But before we wrap up today, I want to get your view on one point, and I think that would be the culmination of today's discussion. As far as I have been telling people that this is academic debate, but while we're at it, we could go into it. As far as who started the war is concerned, now there are things that we know, right? We know that Abiy was in constant conversation with Isaias. I think Isaias was as much involved as anybody could be in a foreign country in terms of planning for the war. We know what the former police commissioner of the Amhara state said in terms of what the Amhara militia were and the FANO were doing in terms of preparation for the war, right? We know what Abiy told Parliament. He told Parliament that he was trying to flex the military capability of the country, and he was trying to make sure that the TPLF didn't have a grasp and understanding of what Ethiopia was capable of doing in terms of the drone technology that he imported from overseas and other military might that he was building. So it's absolutely transparent to me that the war was being planned. It was coming, and the TPLF knew this. And we could debate about who might have shot the first bullet, but in terms of the bigger picture, there is no doubt, right there. But I want to get your opinion around those areas, and then we will take it from there next time.
Yeah, I agree with you. They were both ready for war. There was no question about it. Isaias was happy. They were all ready for it. But I must repeat what I said in the beginning. I think what they wanted was be ready because it may come, but hope that the other would blink first. I think that's what they were both doing. Because there's no question, because we saw the parades in Addis, we saw the parades in Mekelle and all. What were they doing? And that's what I was saying. They were playing chicken game, but with mortars and crazy stuff, and of course somebody always, the problem with the chicken game is you have to second guess what the other is thinking, right? And there's no way you can know that. And then that's why you always you are making decisions based on assumptions that built on 75 assumptions, right? So both sides were ready for war. I have absolutely no doubt about it, but I don't think they wanted to fight. That's my sense, one. And secondly, you're right. In terms of the trigger, I think the TPLF attacked the Northern Command first. But for me, the war it didn't start at the time. It started already when Abiy became prime minister. And that is why I don't only blame the TPLF for the war. It started because they were playing childish games, but with guns and tanks and whatever. That is my sense. So this is a war that was brought onto us because they were playing like children. That's what I think. Rather than behaving, rather than, and that's also one of the things, you said the TPLF was being principled. Okay. But at what risk? At the risk of war? At the risk of war? Like, if they didn't have to hold elections, at least the federal government would have had no right to say you are not a legitimate government, and we're gonna give the money to the local, to the municipalities rather than to you. They could have been they could have avoided, or at least tried to, right? Rather than trying to use every little thing to put pressure and create even more volatility, they could have moved, at least they could have shifted it, and more time could have meant less likelihood, at least a possibility of finding a solution. But to simplify it, in terms of the trigger, yes, the TPLF pulled the first trigger, but the war was, you're right, it was coming. And it was coming because they were both playing childish games, but with guns, with mortars and tanks and whatnot. And that is why, and I have consistently said, it is a war that they both brought upon us, and it's a war that they both have been doing. I don't know, we don't know the exact facts or all of that, but this is a war that one cannot blame the other. They both brought it, and they must stop it together as well.
All right, I think we will have to park this train as well here, and I'm sure we have multiple parked trains, and please do take an account of them, because we return to every issue that we have left hanging. But for now, I want to fast forward to what is happening now, right? So after as I would like to put it, after the TPLF routed the national army out of Tigray, or as you would maybe like to put it, after Abiy magnanimously withdrawn from Tigray. I think that's how we would want to put it. The TPLF's position has been clear, right? They say that the status quo ante has to be resumed for them to withdraw from the area that they have advanced into, and they want to get some guarantees that Tigray won't be invaded. They want to get some guarantees that services will be resumed. And short of that kind of guarantee, the only way of making sure that services to Tigray are resumed is by arm twisted the federal government. And that is exactly what they are doing by through the incursion, as people would like to put it, to the Amhara and the Afar regions. But you turn to insist that was a mistake, that the TPLF should withdraw from Afar and from Amhara regions, although you aren't as insistent on the Amhara forces who are containing, or rather annexing Western Tigray. I haven't seen it say that the Amhara forces should also withdraw and the TPLF should withdraw, and the status quo ante November 2020 should be resumed. So one, I don't think that you have been consistent in your advocacy in that department. And second, what other solution do you give to the Tigray Defense Forces?
So, but I think maybe so. One, when I was speaking about the TPLF incursions, so you're right. I think we can call it withdrawal, whatever. One, it doesn't matter.
It matters. I think it matters. I think it matters.
Okay, if it does, then this is my thinking, because I don't know, but this is my thinking. I think the feds already realized, especially once they failed to separate the fighters from the people. Once the people of Tigray, for any reason, right, remained with the TPLF, I think the feds realized they had no choice.
Let me.
If you give me 1 minute, maybe I'll. Okay.
No, okay, because I want to make sure. I want to make sure that you would agree with the things that happened around the time they were forced out or they withdrew.
Yeah, I was going to come to that. I'll come to that.
Go ahead.
So basically, so the feds had realized that, but they couldn't leave, and this is my thinking, because of the elections. And at the time as well, the TPLF was recovering, so they had regrouped and all. So they were, as you said, they were launching. According to Getachew Reda, there was actually no immediate plan. There was an ANDF offensive, and then they just built it into a counter-offensive. But they didn't have an immediate plan to actually engage in an offensive. That's what he said. But anyway, so it was, the feds had realized that it was an unsustainable situation, and the TPLF fighters had regrouped. So when it was already a plan or a desire to leave, it was a moment where the TPLF had actually built their capabilities. So I think they were victorious in some of the places, but they caused the most damage as the federal force were leaving. That's my thinking. So that's very. They caused a lot of damage, but they caused that while the federal force were leaving.
So if I could throw in something that happened, which I think is incontrovertible as to whether or not it happened. So the New York Times says that on the days leading up to their withdrawal, quote unquote, a military cargo plane was downed, right, by the TPLF forces. It also says that the Tigray Defense Forces managed to capture thousands of prisoners of war, right, which they, you could say, unfairly paraded through the streets of Mekelle, right? And the feds, as the term you're using, withdrew only from certain areas. They didn't withdraw, for instance, from areas like from southern Tigray. They had to be forced out through military engagement, right? And when you see all the evidence, what does it point to? To me, it tells me that they were forced out from central Tigray, from Mekelle, and it wasn't by coincidence that the military plane was shot down at the time. It wasn't by coincidence that the thousands of prisoners of war were captured at that time. It was a reason that the federal forces were drawn out of or driven out of Tigray, rather. I should say. I don't know. I think my English is betraying me. So that's what happened. That's what happened, right?
So basically, I think I agree with you that there were victories, there were build-ups, and that obviously the federal government is not going to leave because they think, okay, we are done here. No, they were under pressure. There's no question about that. They were under a lot of pressure, and that is what.
Why were they?
Including the military.
Again, yeah. Adam, why were they under pressure around Mekelle, and not under? So you try to tell me that the federal troops couldn't separate the civilian population from the combatants, and that had made life difficult for them, and they had to withdraw because they realized that it was unsustainable or unwinnable, right? And I think Abebe has said as much. But why wasn't that the case in Western Tigray? Oh, okay, Western Tigray, you could give me a different argument. You could say that the Amhara are claiming it belongs to them, and it's a separate matter. But why didn't the federal army withdraw from Alamata, for instance? From Alamata, they had to be forced out, right? And from
Alamata,
most parts
it was also claimed by Alamata, Koram. They are also claimed by Amhara forces, right?
What? Yeah. But I mean, they didn't leave southern Tigray.
Southern Tigray, yes.
Southern Tigray. They had to be forced out. So why is it that they faced such problems in central Tigray and didn't face those same?
I think because again, I'm not it's very important that I'm not a military strategist, right? So I don't know everything, but my thinking is this. So basically what they did was they moved the army, whatever was left, they try to move it parts to the west and parts towards the Djibouti area, right? So there were areas, Alamata and all these places, the boundaries were not fortified. They were less fortified than the rest of the country. But again, I think because the second point I think is more important than whether they were forced or not. I agree that they were forced. I don't think they left because they thought we're done here. No, they knew there was no sustainable. Partly because of the regrouping and the strength.
They were forced. I think they were forced. I think they were forced. A euphemistic way of putting it. I'm saying they were defeated. So there's a difference. Well, again, Adam, I want to make sure that.
But even if it was a defeat, Teklay, let me just put it. So even if it was a defeat, yes, you may be right. It's a defeat, but it's a battle because the war is going on.
Adam,
the war is going on.
I want to tell you my motive. I'm not trying to prove or to establish that the TDF they have military superiority or ingenuity. That's not my intention. I'm trying to maybe not today, but to justify the siege, the total communication blackout, the total discontinuing of services. They become completely understandable if you accept that the feds were defeated and they resorted into another form of warfare, right? So a lot of things become easier to explain if we establish that they were defeated, right? If we don't established that a lot of things become completely hard to explain. So the main reason, the purpose, I'm trying to make sure that we agree what transpired is because I want us to discuss why Abiy resorted to the things that he has, right? So,
Okay.
but people tend to be tend to refuse to accept this fact because they think that we are, when I say we, people who are generally on the TDF side, we're trying to prove that the TDF is militarily superior by nature or something magical. That's not the point. I think warfare is about leadership. It's about organization. It has nothing to do with nature or anything. But I think that has got into the way of people's thinking, and it has made it extremely difficult for them to accept. So I want you to understand my rationale when I say
so because that's what I was saying. Because I think we we don't agree completely, but I think we agree to a large extent. And the subsequent strategies maybe we'll come to it later. But what I was trying to explain essentially that I think that was a moment when they were out of Tigray. It was a moment for potential negotiation, and that's when I said, now, rather than engaging in an offensive because they think they have momentum, as you said, because they feel now they have overpowered the federal forces, and now we can engage in an offensive because they thought, okay, if we get an offensive, I think the plan was actually to destabilize, hoping that the federal government would fall, or perhaps the Amhara government would fall. They had big plans, they had big thinking. But I think that created new grievances, new problems. That made a negotiated solution to the problem even more difficult. And that's what my thinking was. Yes, there is a contested area in Western Tigray that is controlled by Amhara and federal forces. Yes, there is. It is contested, yes. But if you engage more, it just makes a negotiated settlement even more difficult. So it's not going to create a balance, right? Okay, now we have this, they have that, and now they can negotiate. It actually creates more anger, more reason to fight. That's my thinking.
But it's so I think the reason why TDF is advanced doesn't make sense to you, or the reason that you believe that it's making things more intractable than they are already, is because you believe that the federal government magnanimously again withdrew from Tigray, right?
No, so
if you believe that if you believe that they left Tigray because they were defeated and that given time they were going to reorganize and come back to invade Tigray, if you realize
I do not think they'll come back. That's my sense.
Why would you not believe that?
Especially because they have realized it's not winnable. I think going back would be madness. That's my thinking. Yeah. Okay.
I think I will let you go, but
no, it's okay. So
I think we've gone for 1 hour 40 minutes. I think that's more than what we had planned for. But so this would be my my proposal for next time. We will discuss privately, but we meet next time, and then we take it from there. But we try to do the experiment that I had suggested in the beginning, right? I think there is more. I think there is more chance for being more productive in that kind of exercise than what we are. Although I'm not saying that what we have done today is in its own right. I think it was worthwhile.
I think it was helpful. And of course, maybe I think we were a bit ambitious, and that's why I said let's take it 2-3 issues at a time, because every issue unfortunately is contested, and of course every issue raises sub issues. So, but I think we did well. But if you allow me 1 minute, basically what I was trying to say was that the TPLF may have had military advantage in engaging in an offensive, right? But that made the possibility of a negotiated settlement more, not less difficult. You can say it could create a sense of balance. We've controlled this, they have controlled that, and then we can solve it. But as I feared, and this is my biggest fear, and I have written it on Twitter as well, opportunities are often very, very fleeting. They happen, and then you have to seize them. And unfortunately, I don't think there's any external actor focused on Ethiopia. I don't think the Americans are focused on Ethiopia. I don't think the Europeans, I don't think anyone else other than the Ethiopians is as focused on the war as we are. And because they are not focused, they miss these opportunities, right? And I think if the TPLF wanted a peaceful resolution, they could have said, okay, we have the military advantage now, but let's give this a chance, because they could have done it 2 weeks later. I don't think the army, if it was defeated completely, I don't think they would have come back in 2 weeks. They could have given a 2 months break, and that could have created better possibilities for a peaceful negotiation. And what happened instead is they engage in an offensive, and what happens is it creates new grievances, and that's the biggest problem with war. You go into war because you have difference on one thing. You start it, it becomes 25 things, because each conflict, each Kalashnikov creates its own grievances. And that is what happened with the TPLF advancing to Afar and to Amhara region. It just creates more problems, more grievances, rather than solutions. That's why I've said, because for me, quite frankly, I don't care whether the Amharas and federal government leave my, Western Tigray, Wolkait and Tagari. I don't care, but they're not going to do it because precisely because now it's not even about claim and all, but they're just afraid that if the TPLF can advance into other parts with the guns it has, imagine if it has free access. Just like the TPLF does not trust the Amharas and the federal government, they don't trust the TPLF, you see? But anyway, so that's what I was trying to say. So I'm not being inconsistent. I'm just recognizing opportunities for peace, and every time you miss them, you create new grievances, and that makes the next negotiated possibility even less likely. That is my thinking.
Yeah. I think I will leave it with you having the momentum, just like the TDF is having the momentum in the ground. But can you at least agree with me that do you cringe when they say law enforcement operation, or when they say
no, there's no such thing. This is there's no law.
Or when they say the junta or the junta, as they say, do you cringe?
Well, listen. So law enforcement is the objective, right? The means is war.
So you see some element of truth in it.
You mean in terms of law enforcement?
I mean, for me, it was a farcical. For me, it was a farcical joke when they started saying that it was a law enforcement. You can't be talking about law enforcement when.
But Teklay, once you attack it, because that's I said do not go to war. Even after the North Command was attacked, I said no, we should not do it. We should not do it, because I knew that it will create more problems. Not because I wanted the TPLF to win and all, but I knew that if this thing starts, it's gonna take forever. Like we see, because war, you don't know when you start it, let alone when you end it. It's very difficult, precisely because, as I said, it creates new grievances. So you don't want to start war. So that's why I said, even with the attack against Northern Command, don't do it. But once it's attacked, that is a crime. There is no question about it. You might say it's preemptive and all, and technically, the federal government, again, you might say either we ignore the constitution, right? You drop it, but you have to accept the federal government. It's very simple, and you cannot fight the national government. So to that extent, there is a crime. Now, is it justifiable? That's another thing. But there is a crime.
Adem, I'm not trying to ruin your party now. You have made a good point, and I want you to live on a happy note. So, but it was
I'm a happy person. I think we need to talk about these things.
I can see that, and I'm happy that you're happy. And I think it was a good faith discussion, and it means a lot to me. I appreciate that. And I appreciate that you took the time and you believe that we could have a meaningful conversation. I hope I haven't let you down, and I hope it was meaningful.
No, I absolutely enjoyed it.
We'll continue. Yeah,
we shall.
We'll continue this.
I don't want to say I enjoyed it, because I think. Can I say one more thing? On Please. Twitter, especially, I hate that it has become about campaigns, right? That we're going to have the last laughter and this and that, as if it's a computer game. Right, that is what it has become on Twitter, and I don't want to. I don't. When I say I enjoyed this conversation, I don't mean it in that sense, because I think what is happening is it's really tragic. But this is the only way we can make progress, and I really hope our people, rather than second guessing, like you assumed how I think, what I know, we often get it wrong. When you are thinking about the other person, you often get it wrong. And there's one thing that's very important. You know, I may be wrong and all, but I'm never wrong about my intention, right? So if I want to hurt somebody or if I want to make somebody happy, my intention I'm always clear about. But what I do, that I don't know. So, you know, what I do may not make you happy, right? But my intention may actually be to make you happy. So if you tell me you are an evil person, you are trying to make me sad, I'll be like, no, because at least everybody is certain about their intentions. And once you question that and you get it wrong, they start thinking you must be crazy, you know? So we should be careful to judge our intentions. It's because the other person, if there's one thing they are certain about, it's their intention. And if you get their judgment about their intentions wrong, they think you are crazy. You see?
I think I have said as much I think I said as much in the beginning that one of the main reasons I wanted us to have conversation was because I don't see bad intent in whatever you do. As much as I disagree with you, and I disagree with you vehemently on political views, I don't think that you are trying to do. I don't think that you mean harm to Tigray, and it means a lot to me, right? So that was one of the reasons why I thought there could be a chance for meaningful conversation, and I think it proved to be. And I'm very grateful for today. But hopefully we'll meet next time. And it was a pleasure, mate. And
it was a pleasure as well. And thank you very much again, Teklay. And I hope you get I don't know, whatever you want after this, because I think we've been talking for almost 2 hours now. But thank you very much. And yes, let's take it up. Let's take it up. And hopefully you should have more people into your program as well.
Absolutely. Cheers, mate. Bye-bye.
Take care. Ciao.